It's strange how one moment, one heartbeat, can change the entire direction of your life. I wasn't looking for trouble that night. I was just walking home in the rain, keeping my head down, minding my own world. Then I saw her, an old woman, fragile and slow, stepping into the road as headlights came rushing near. I don't know what came over me. My legs just moved. My hands pulled her back. And in that single second, everything that I thought my life was, ended. And something completely new began. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that seemed to wash away sound and blur the edges of the world. The streets were almost empty, just the faint glimmer of streetlights stretching across wet asphalt. My clothes were already soaked through, but I didn't mind. I had grown used to evenings like this, quiet, lonely, unremarkable. I carried a bag of groceries, thinking about nothing special, just the small details of survival, wondering if the ceiling in my little apartment would keep leaking this winter, or if I could stretch my paycheck long enough to make it through another month. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I'd learned to stay invisible. Being invisible meant safe. As I reached the crossing at the corner of Maple Street, I noticed her. She was small, hunched, her steps hesitant, each one seeming to cost her effort. An umbrella trembled in her hand, too weak to fight the wind. The world around her was rushing, cars swerving through puddles, horns blaring at each other, but she moved as though none of it mattered, as though time itself was slipping past her. I remember slowing my steps, something inside me tightening. She shouldn't be out here in this storm, I thought. And then, as if the world wanted to test me, it happened. A black car turned sharply onto the road. Its headlights cut through the rain, blinding for an instant, and the old woman froze in the middle of the crossing. My heart lurched. The distance between her frail body and the machine speeding toward her was a handful of breaths, no more. I didn't think. I couldn't. My body moved before my mind had the chance to weigh the danger. I dropped my groceries and ran, my shoes sliding on the wet ground. I remember the sound of my breath tearing through me, the screech of tires, the rush of adrenaline. I reached her just in time, my arms pulling her with a force I didn't know I had, yanking her away from the path of the car. For a moment, we stumbled together onto the curb. The car blared its horn in anger, not even slowing as it disappeared into the rain. My chest was heaving, my heart pounding in my ears, but all I could hear was the faint gasp of the woman beside me. She clutched my sleeve, her eyes wide and bewildered. Her umbrella had fallen, her gray hair plastered against her forehead, rain dripping down the lines of her face. She looked at me as though I were someone she had been waiting for all her life, though I had only been a stranger on a street. "Thank you. Oh my goodness, thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking with fear and relief. I shook my head quickly, trying to steady her. "It's all right. You're safe now. Let's get you out of the rain." My words came out rushed, almost awkward. I wasn't used to being a hero. I wasn't used to anyone even noticing me. But the way she held my sleeve, like it was the only anchor keeping her from floating away, stirred something deep in me. She leaned on me as I guided her toward the sidewalk, her steps weak, her breathing uneven. I could tell she was still trembling from the shock. "I don't know what I would have done," she murmured, almost to herself. "If you hadn't been there," I offered her a faint smile, brushing it off. "Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. People didn't run into danger so easily. Most would have hesitated, maybe shouted, maybe called for help. But I had jumped. I had pulled her back, as if some invisible thread tied me to her fate. When we reached the other side of the street, I asked if she was all right, if she had someone nearby who could help her. She nodded slowly, pointing with a trembling hand down the block. My house, just there. Her voice cracked, as if even speaking cost her energy. I wanted to leave then, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I had done my part. She was safe. But the way she looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name, gratitude, disbelief, maybe even recognition, kept my feet rooted. Come, I'll walk you, I said softly, surprising myself with the gentleness in my tone. I steadied her arm, and we moved together slowly through the rain. I could feel her frailty in the weight she leaned against me, her bones delicate, her frame so light it seemed the storm might carry her away if I let go. Step by step, we approached her house, an old stone building with ivy crawling up its sides. It looked worn, yet dignified, like it had held stories for generations. When we reached the door, she turned to me, her hand still clutching my sleeve. You saved my life, she said, her voice clearer now. What's your name? I hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone had asked me that with such genuine interest. People usually didn't care. I swallowed, giving her my name quietly. She repeated it, as though committing it to memory, her lips shaping it carefully like it mattered to her. I didn't know why, but the sound of it in her voice felt strange, almost sacred. Before I could step back, she held my hand tightly, her eyes shining with an intensity one didn't expect. You may not understand tonight, but what you've done, it means more than you'll ever realize. I didn't know how to respond. I only nodded, offering a small smile before slipping away into the rain, my clothes heavy, my body still humming with adrenaline. As I walked back toward my forgotten groceries scattered on the ground, I felt a strange unease in my chest. Not fear. Not regret. Something else. Something that told me my life would never be the same again. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, rain still beating against the windows, I kept seeing her eyes, the way they had searched mine, the way they had clung to me as though I had become part of her story. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just a passing moment, an accident of circumstance. But deep inside, I knew better. Some encounters don't end when you walk away. Some encounters follow you, echoing in the silence, changing the shape of everything you thought you were. And even though I didn't know it then, the old woman's trembling hand clutching my sleeve had just opened a door I never thought existed. The next morning began like any other, with me trying to shake off the weight of another restless night. The rain had gone, but the air still smelled damp, the sky heavy with leftover clouds. I moved through my small apartment the way I always did, with quiet efficiency. Boil water. Make coffee. Sit at the cracked kitchen table and try to gather myself for another day of work. I thought about the old woman more than I wanted to admit, replaying the way her hand had clung to mine, the way her voice had trembled. I told myself it was just a fleeting encounter, a piece of kindness I could carry in my chest but leave behind. I didn't know that life was already waiting to prove me wrong. It happened in the late afternoon, when I returned home. My shoes squelched from puddles, my arms tired from carrying bags, and my mind filled with the small worries of the week. At first, I didn't notice the car parked in front of my building. It was sleek, black, polished to perfection, and utterly out of place in the worn neighborhood I lived in. I thought maybe someone had gotten lost or taken a wrong turn. But when I reached the steps to my building, the car door opened, and a figure emerged. She was nothing like the world I knew. Every detail about her spoke of a life so far removed from mine that for a moment, I just stared. She was tall, poised, with long dark hair that looked like it had been styled by someone paid handsomely for the task. Her coat looked more expensive than everything I owned combined. But it wasn't her wealth that stunned me, it was the way her eyes found mine immediately, like she had been waiting for me. "Are you?" She said my name softly, as though she had rehearsed it. I nodded, my throat dry. She stepped closer, and that's when I saw it, the emotion in her face, raw and unpolished, breaking through the carefully built armor of elegance. "You saved my grandmother last night." I froze. My heart skipped, unsure of how to handle the weight of her words. She's all right?" I asked quietly, needing to know. "She's fine," she said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with something deeper. "Because of you." If you hadn't been there, her sentence trailed off, and for a moment, she closed her eyes as though she couldn't even bear to finish the thought. When she opened them again, they were glistening, and I realized she wasn't just saying thank you. She was confessing something. Gratitude, yes, but also desperation. "I owe you everything," she whispered. I shifted uncomfortably, clutching my grocery bag tighter. Compliments had always sat strangely with me. I didn't know how to accept them, especially from someone who looked like she belonged to a different universe. "You don't owe me anything," I muttered. It was just instinct. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head, stepping closer, her eyes not letting me escape. "No. You don't understand. People don't risk themselves for strangers. You didn't think twice, you didn't hesitate. You saved her like she was your own family." Her voice broke slightly, and I could hear the truth in it. It wasn't rehearsed or polite. It was raw, the silence stretched between us. I could feel the stares of neighbors from windows above, curious about the sight of such a luxury car and such a woman at my doorstep. I hated being noticed, and their eyes burned against my skin. She seemed to sense my discomfort because she straightened, her voice softening. "I just needed to see you. To look at the person who gave me back the only family I have left." Her words caught me off guard. The only family she had left. Something in me softened at that, though I tried not to show it. I had lived with loneliness so long that I knew the way it could eat a person alive. I wanted to say something to ease the ache I heard in her tone, but the words tangled in my chest. When she asked if she could take me out for dinner, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt so absurd. Me, sitting across from her in some glittering place, trying to pretend I belonged there? It felt impossible. I shook my head quickly. "You don't need to do that." "Really?" I don't fit in that world." Her eyes narrowed, and I saw something shift in her expression. Determination. "I don't care about that," she said firmly. "I want to know you. You matter to me, whether you believe it or not." Those words unsettled me. People didn't just say things like that. Especially not people like her. I wanted to step back, to retreat into the safety of my invisibility. But there was something magnetic about the way she looked at me. She wasn't just grateful. She was curious, drawn in. And even though I told myself to be careful, a tiny part of me ached to be seen the way she was seeing me. We stood there in the chill of the fading afternoon, neither of us moving, the distance between us shrinking with every heartbeat. She finally handed me a card with her number, her fingers brushing mine briefly. The touch sent a strange warmth through me. "Call me," she said. "Please." I didn't promise. I couldn't. My world and hers were carved from different stones, and every instinct told me it would be foolish to mix them. But as I watched her return to the car, her silhouette framed by luxury and shadows, I knew something had already shifted. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. Someone had looked right at me, past the cracks, past the poverty, past the armor, and decided I mattered. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the card on the table catching the glow of the streetlight outside. I told myself I wouldn't call. I told myself I couldn't let this go further. But beneath all the warnings, beneath the weight of my doubts, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in so long that I barely recognized it. A pull. A question. A dangerous hope. I tried to resist at first. I told myself it would be easier to let her card sit untouched, to leave the memory of that night as nothing more than a brief, strange intersection between two lives that were never meant to meet again. But the problem was she didn't leave me that choice. 2 days later, I saw her again. This time she wasn't hidden behind a car window or wrapped in the elegance of her world. She was standing outside my apartment building like she belonged there, holding a bag of food, her hair tied back in a loose bun that made her look far younger than the composed, untouchable woman I had first seen. I almost didn't recognize her at first. When I walked up the steps, her face lit up as though she had been waiting all day just to see me. "You didn't call," she said softly, with a smile that wasn't angry, just quietly knowing. I shifted uncomfortably, fumbling for an excuse that wouldn't make me sound rude. I didn't think, it didn't seem right. She tilted her head, studying me, her eyes searching for something under my hesitation. "Can I come in?" she asked, holding up the bag. "I brought food. It's nothing fancy. Just something I thought you might like." Every instinct screamed at me to say no. I hated people in my space, hated the vulnerability of letting someone see how I lived. But her voice was gentle, her persistence disarming. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and let her step inside. She looked around quietly, not with judgment, but with curiosity. My apartment was small, a little worn, but clean. I expected her to look uncomfortable, but instead she smiled softly as though she admired the simplicity. She set the bag down on my table and started unpacking the food without asking permission, as though she'd already decided she belonged there. We sat across from each other, eating quietly at first. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help noticing the way she carried herself, even in this ordinary setting. She seemed too big for the space, yet she also didn't seem to mind that it wasn't a grand dining hall or some luxury suite. After a while, she began talking, not about her wealth or her lifestyle, but about her grandmother. She described the old woman's stubbornness, her humor, the way she had raised her after her parents were gone. The words tumbled out with a warmth that softened her entire face, and I realized then that beneath all the polished surfaces, she was just a woman who loved fiercely and feared losing the only person she had left. I listened more than I spoke, though she asked me questions about my work, my life, the books stacked on my shelf. Her curiosity was genuine, and that unsettled me more than anything. I wasn't used to anyone wanting to know the details of my existence. My story wasn't glamorous, it wasn't the kind of story people leaned in to hear. But she leaned in anyway, her eyes fixed on mine like each answer mattered. Over the next week, she appeared again and again. Sometimes she'd call ahead, other times she'd simply show up. She invited me out, not to fancy dinners as I had feared, but to simple places, quiet cafes, a bookstore downtown, a park where she insisted on feeding pigeons even though she laughed at herself the whole time. It felt unreal, like I had stumbled into someone else's life. Every time I tried to push her away with reminders of how different we were, she brushed it aside, as though differences were only details she refused to acknowledge. But the world around her did notice. I heard whispers when we walked together, sharp glances from people who recognized her and couldn't understand why she was spending her time with me. Once, at a cafe, a pair of well-dressed strangers whispered loudly enough for me to hear, mocking her for being obsessed with a nobody. My cheeks burned, shame tightening my chest, and I tried to pull away from her then, tried to stand and leave. But she caught my wrist gently, her voice steady as she said, "Let them talk. I don't care. They don't know me, and they don't know you." Her defiance stunned me. The way she held my gaze in that moment, fierce and unshakable, made something inside me quiver. Nobody had ever fought for me before. Nobody had ever claimed me so openly. It was overwhelming, frightening even, because I didn't know if my heart could withstand the weight of it. I had spent so long protecting myself from disappointment, from rejection, from being reminded I was never enough. And now here was this woman, a billionaire's granddaughter, looking at me like I was everything she had been searching for. At night, when I lay awake in my bed, I replayed her words, her laughter, the way her hands sometimes brushed against mine when we walked. I tried to convince myself it was only gratitude, that she was only clinging to me because I had saved her grandmother. But deep down, I felt the truth pressing harder every day. It was more than gratitude. It was obsession. It was longing. And the terrifying part was that I could feel my own walls beginning to crack. One evening, as we sat in the quiet of my apartment again, she suddenly looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Do you know what it feels like," she asked softly, "to spend your whole life surrounded by people and still be alone?" Her voice broke on the last word, her eyes glistening as she searched my face for understanding. I swallowed hard, because I did know. I knew it too well. But instead of saying so, I only nodded. She reached out then, her fingers brushing mine in the faintest touch, and whispered, "That's why I can't stop coming back. You're the only one who makes the loneliness quiet." The air between us grew heavy, and I didn't know how to respond. My heart raced, torn between the instinct to run and the desperate need to stay. Her words lodged themselves deep inside me, echoing long after she left that night. I realized then that whatever this was, it was no longer something I could ignore or dismiss. It was real, it was dangerous, and it was only just beginning. The first time her grandmother appeared at my door again, I felt the same rush of surprise that I had felt on the night I pulled her from the street. She looked different this time, healthier, steadier, with her posture straighter, as though the shock of what had happened had faded into memory. She wore a pale cardigan that matched her soft silver hair, and her smile was warm in a way that reminded me of someone who had lived long enough to know how rare warmth really was. She didn't ask if she could come in, she simply stepped inside as though she had every right to be there. I let her, because something in her presence felt too familiar to deny. She studied my small apartment without a single ounce of judgment, just curiosity. Then she turned to me and said, "My granddaughter talks about you more than she talks about anyone. You must know that." Her voice was gentle, but it carried a weight that made me stand a little straighter. I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell her I wasn't sure what she meant, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She already knew I was lying before I even spoke. We sat down together, and she began to speak of her granddaughter, of the years she had raised her, the hardships she had watched her endure behind the polished facade of their wealthy life. She spoke of loneliness, of betrayal from so-called friends, of nights when her granddaughter had cried in silence so no one would see her break. Listening to her, I felt something ache deep inside me. I realized that the woman I had been pushing away, the one who appeared so untouchable and fierce, carried scars as invisible as mine. The grandmother looked at me then with eyes that seemed to see straight through me. "She's strong, yes. She's brilliant, determined, and sometimes stubborn to a fault. But beneath all that, she is fragile. She doesn't let people in easily. You must understand what it means if she is letting you in." I lowered my gaze, unsure how to respond. I wasn't used to being placed in the center of someone else's story. I had spent so long trying not to be noticed, trying to live quietly without being tangled in the lives of others. Yet here I was, being told that I mattered more than I wanted to admit. Over the next few weeks, the grandmother became a presence in my life just as her granddaughter had. She would sit with me, share stories of her youth, speak with the kind of wisdom that only came from surviving decades of love and loss. There were evenings when all three of us were together, and I would watch the bond between them, so strong, so unbreakable, and feel both comfort and fear. Comfort, because they made me feel like I belonged in a way I hadn't felt in years. Fear, because I knew that once you belonged, you had something to lose. The granddaughter grew more vulnerable with each passing day. At first, she had come to me with fire in her eyes, determined and unrelenting, But as the weeks passed, that fire softened into confessions she had never shared with anyone. She told me about the emptiness of parties filled with people who only wanted to be near her because of her name. She admitted to sleepless nights where she lay awake wondering if anyone would ever see her for who she truly was, not the wealth she represented. She confessed that when she looked at me, she felt something she had never known before. Safety. Those words shook me in ways I couldn't explain. Safety. The one thing I had never been able to give anyone, not even myself. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was not strong enough to carry the weight of someone else's loneliness, that I was just a stranger who had been in the right place at the right time. But the way she looked at me silenced every protest. Her eyes were full of something I didn't dare name, something that both terrified me and pulled me closer every day. One evening, when the three of us sat together in my living room, the grandmother reached for my hand. Her fingers were cool, her grip delicate but steady. "You have to decide," she said quietly, her eyes flickering between me and her granddaughter. "This kind of love is not easy. It is not safe. But it is real. And real things are rare." Her words echoed in my chest long after she left that night. Real things are rare. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the way her granddaughter had rested her head on my shoulder earlier, as if she trusted me with a piece of her soul. I had felt the weight of that trust, heavy and frightening, but also strangely beautiful. I realized then that I was no longer standing on the edge of this story. I was already inside it, whether I wanted to be or not, and though I tried to tell myself I could still step back, that I could still protect myself from the storm gathering around us, a small voice inside me whispered the truth I didn't want to face. I didn't want to leave. I was already too deep, too entangled in the warmth of their presence, in the honesty of her granddaughter's gaze, in the quiet wisdom of the grandmother's words. For the first time in years, I felt seen, I felt needed. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to walk away from that, even if it meant stepping into something that could shatter me. It started slowly, almost like shadows gathering on the edges of a bright day, whispers that slipped into places I couldn't control. At first, it was the glances I noticed when I walked with her through the streets. People recognized her, of course. She belonged to a family whose name carried power and weight, and strangers always noticed when she entered a room. But now, those glances were sharper, cutting, filled with curiosity laced with disdain. They weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. And I could hear their unspoken questions in the silence that stretched between their stares. Who is she? Why her? What could someone like that possibly give someone like the granddaughter of a billionaire? I tried to ignore it, but ignoring only worked until the whispers turned into words I couldn't pretend not to hear. One evening, we went to a restaurant she insisted was quiet and private, but even there, the air shifted when we walked in. A man at a nearby table leaned toward his companion and muttered, not softly enough, "She's lost her mind. Look at who she's dragging around with her." His companion laughed, shaking his head, his voice carrying. "Probably another one of those girls looking for money. They always find their way in somehow." My chest burned, my throat tight. I wanted to shrink into the floor, to vanish, to escape the weight of their judgment. I reached for my coat, mumbling that we should leave, but she stopped me with a hand on mine, her grip firm. Her eyes blazed with something unshakable as she stared across the room at them, then back at me. "Let them choke on their own bitterness," she said quietly, her voice steady even as her fingers trembled. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you." But I did go somewhere. Not that night, but inside myself. I started pulling back, little by little, finding excuses to avoid her, telling myself she didn't deserve to be dragged down by someone like me. I remembered the way people had called me invisible most of my life, the way I had worked so hard to stay out of the spotlight because the spotlight had nothing kind to offer me. I told myself that if I let her obsession with me continue, it would destroy her, that she would wake up one day and realize how foolish it had been to fight so hard for someone who had nothing to offer in return. When I tried to explain this to her, she looked at me with hurt that made my stomach twist. "Why do you think so little of yourself?" she whispered. Her eyes searched mine as though she could force me to see what she saw. "Do you think I care about their words? About their money? About their judgment? None of it means anything without you." I couldn't answer her. My silence was enough, and it cut her deeply. I saw it in the way her face fell, the way her voice shook when she said, "You think you're protecting me, but you're not. You're only breaking me." I thought stepping back would keep her safe, but instead it became a storm. Her family noticed my absence quickly. They didn't approach me directly, but I heard what they said through the thin veil of gossip that traveled quickly in this city. I was a parasite, a distraction, a mistake she would regret. They wanted me gone, and in a way, I gave them what they wanted. I disappeared into myself, keeping my distance, telling her it was better this way, but she was relentless. The more I pulled away, the harder she fought. She showed up at my door, her face pale from sleepless nights, her eyes burning with anger and desperation. "I won't let you do this," she said, her voice raw. "You don't get to decide that you're unworthy of me. That's my choice. And I've already made it." Her words shook me to my core. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I wasn't strong enough to be chosen by someone like her, that one day she would look at me and see nothing but the cracks I tried to hide. But the fire in her eyes made my excuses crumble. She wasn't just grateful anymore. She wasn't just curious. She was in love, and she was willing to burn down everything around her to prove it. When the confrontation with her family finally came, I wasn't there, but she told me about it later, her voice trembling with both fury and triumph. They had gathered around her, polished and cruel, warning her that she was throwing away her name, her reputation, her future for someone unworthy. They called me a gold digger, a nobody, a stain on their carefully constructed empire. And she had stood up, her voice breaking but unyielding, and said, "You think I care about the empire? You think I care about money or power? None of it means anything if I can't be with the person who saved my grandmother, and saved me." When she told me this, her hands were shaking, her body trembling with the aftermath of her rebellion. I stared at her, stunned, unable to comprehend the weight of what she had done. She had chosen me, not quietly, not in secret, but loudly, publicly, in the face of the very people who could destroy her. And in that moment, I realized the depth of her obsession wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It was devotion, fierce and consuming, the kind of devotion that terrified me as much as it warmed me. That night, when she collapsed into my arms, exhausted from the fight, I held her tightly, my own chest aching with a mixture of fear and love. I still wasn't sure if I was enough, if I could survive the storm of her world or the weight of her passion. But one truth pulsed inside me with terrifying clarity: I couldn't let her go. Not anymore. Not after everything she had risked just to keep me close. The days that followed felt different, as though the air itself had shifted around us. After her confrontation with her family, she carried herself in a new way, still fierce, still determined, but there was a tenderness in her that seemed reserved only for me. She no longer tried to impress me with grand gestures or expensive places. Instead, she wanted to be in my small world, as though she found more peace in the cracked walls of my apartment than in the glass towers her family owned. She began showing up without warning, arms full of groceries, insisting on cooking with me even though she laughed at herself for not knowing how to chop onions properly. I would watch her struggle with a kitchen knife, her hair falling in loose strands across her face, her laughter filling the tiny space, and something inside me would ache in the best way. It was ordinary, so simple, and yet it felt extraordinary because it was real. She loved to drag me outside too, but not into her world. Into mine. She wanted to walk through the noisy streets I walked every day, to sit on benches in the park where kids screamed and couples argued, to eat food from vendors who recognized me by name. She said she wanted to taste the life I lived, the life untouched by money and power. At first, I thought it was just her way of proving she could adapt, but as the days stretched on, I realized she wasn't pretending. She was genuinely happy in these moments, laughing freely, her eyes sparkling in ways I had never seen when she wore her expensive clothes or stood in glittering halls. And every time I saw that joy, I felt myself falling deeper, despite every fear I carried, but love was not without its shadows. Her world still pulled at her like chains she could not fully escape. There were phone calls late at night that she ignored but that left her staring at the wall in silence afterward. There were events she was forced to attend, and when she came back from them, I could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the way her smile faltered as she collapsed against me. I didn't ask what had been said to her, because I already knew. Their words hadn't changed. To them, I was still nothing more than a distraction, a mistake, a threat to everything they thought she should be, and then there was my own doubt. It haunted me like a shadow that refused to leave. I would wake in the middle of the night, her arm draped across me, her breathing soft against my neck, and wonder how long this could last. Could someone like her truly choose me forever? Or was this just a phase, an obsession that would burn itself out and leave me broken in the ashes? I told myself to be careful, to guard the pieces of my heart that were still fragile, but every time she whispered my name in the dark, every time her lips brushed my skin as though I was something sacred, I felt those walls collapsing more. One evening, we sat together on my small balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance, the air thick with the smell of summer rain. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, her voice soft. "I wish we could stay like this forever," she whispered. There was something in her tone that scared me, something almost desperate. I turned to look at her, and in the glow of the city, I saw tears glistening in her eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked, brushing her hair back gently. She shook her head, trying to smile through it. "Nothing. I'm just scared. Scared that somehow this will be taken away from me." Her words pierced me, because they mirrored the fear I carried but never spoke aloud. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching heavy between us. Finally, I took her hand and squeezed it, my voice low but steady. "We'll fight for it," I said. "Whatever comes, we'll fight." She looked at me then, her eyes wide, her expression breaking open into something raw and beautiful. She kissed me softly, slowly, with a tenderness that carried both gratitude and longing. It wasn't the fierce, desperate kisses we sometimes shared, it was something deeper, something that said she believed me, even if just for that moment. But the truth was, fighting wasn't easy. There were days when the pressure of her world pressed harder against us, when I caught her staring into the distance with a sadness she tried to hide. There were moments when I recoiled from my own reflection, convinced that I wasn't enough, that she deserved someone who could stand tall in her world instead of shrinking in the corners of it. Yet every time I tried to step back, she pulled me closer, her obsession burning brighter, her devotion unshaken. She wouldn't let me go, even when I doubted myself. Slowly, the rhythm of our days became something I hadn't expected, a balance between her chaos and my simplicity. She began to find comfort in the little routines of my life, making coffee in the mornings, sitting with me in silence after long days, sharing laughter over the smallest things. And I began to find strength in her presence, in the way she refused to let me disappear into the shadows I had always hidden in. For the first time in years, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was worth loving. Still, deep inside, I knew the storm wasn't gone. It hovered just beyond the horizon, waiting, inevitable. But as I held her close on those quiet nights, her heartbeat steady against mine, I told myself that even if the storm came, I would face it. Because whatever this was, fragile, messy, terrifying, it was real. And real things are rare. The storm came sooner than either of us wanted, though deep down we both knew it was only a matter of time. It arrived not as some sudden explosion, but as a steady, growing force pressing against the fragile walls we had built around our world. It started with her grandmother, the woman I had saved, the woman whose gratitude had once seemed like a bridge between our two worlds. She had always treated me with kindness, her eyes warm whenever she looked at me, but her warmth had begun to cool. Maybe it was pressure from the family, maybe it was her own fears about what the future would look like for her granddaughter. Whatever the reason, her voice one evening carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "I am thankful for what you did," she said softly, her hand resting over mine as though to soften the blow. "But love is more than gratitude. And life in our world is not easy. It will eat you alive if you're not careful." I nodded, silent, because what could I say? She wasn't wrong. I had thought the same things, whispered them to myself in the darkness when my lover slept in my arms. But hearing it from her cut deeper, because it wasn't judgment, it was worry. It was a warning her granddaughter overheard enough to know, and the argument that followed left the house trembling with unspoken pain. I stayed out of it, because it wasn't my fight to win, but when she stormed into my arms that night, her chest heaving and her face streaked with tears, I knew how deeply it had shaken her. "Why can't they understand?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Why can't they see that you're the only one who makes me feel alive?" I held her, my hands running through her hair, whispering words I wasn't sure I believed myself, words about love being stronger than fear, about us being enough. But even as I said them, doubt gnawed at me, the pressure grew heavier with time. Tabloids began to circle, their headlines filled with venom, their photographs stolen moments of us walking hand in hand through streets we thought were anonymous. Words like gold digger, scandal, obsession splashed across pages, my face blurred but recognizable enough to humiliate me. I avoided shops, avoided neighbors, ashamed of the way strangers' eyes lingered on me. But she didn't flinch. She stood taller, walking beside me with her chin high, daring the world to judge. Her courage was beautiful, but it terrified me. Every step she took toward me seemed to drag her further from the life she had known, and I couldn't shake the fear that one day she would regret it. One night, after another ugly article was published, I told her I wanted to leave the city. My voice shook as I said it, my chest heavy with dread. "They'll never let us be," I whispered. "Your family, the world, they'll crush us. Maybe if I disappear, maybe if I let you go, you'll be free." The silence that followed was unbearable. I thought she would cry, or shout, or plead. But instead, she stared at me with a fire in her eyes that made my knees weak. "Do you think I'd be free without you?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, every word slicing through my doubts. "Don't you understand? You're not my cage. You're my escape. You're the only thing that makes this life worth living. If you leave, I don't just lose you, I lose myself." Her words broke something inside me, a wall I had held for so long. I pulled her into me, holding her so tightly it almost hurt, because I needed her to feel how desperately I needed her too. And that night, for the first time, I let myself believe. Truly believe. Maybe the world hated us, maybe her family would never accept me, maybe whispers would always follow wherever we went, but none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the way her lips found mine as though they had always belonged there, the way our bodies fit together like two pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place, the way our hearts beat in unison against the noise outside. We began to live louder after that. We stopped hiding. We went to places where people could see us, and when they whispered, she smiled defiantly and kissed me harder, as if to brand the truth of us into the air. She introduced me to people who mattered in her world, not to seek approval but to make a statement, that I was hers, and she was mine. It wasn't easy. The stares, the fake smiles, the cruel comments behind polished masks, they still hurt. But her hand was always in mine, steady and warm, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. Still, late at night, when she slept peacefully beside me, I sometimes lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of the cost. What if the cost of her love was everything she had built, everything she was meant to inherit? Could I live with that weight? Could I carry the guilt of being the reason her world turned against her? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that when she looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had before. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth everything. The storm was far from over, but we were no longer running from it. We were standing in it together, hand in hand, daring it to tear us apart. And in her eyes, in the fierce devotion that burned there, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't unwanted. I was hers. And she was mine. The final breaking point arrived not with scandal or shouting, but with silence. A silence that settled over her family after months of resistance, a silence so heavy it carried the weight of defeat. They had tried everything: persuasion, warnings, threats, even cruel manipulation, but none of it had broken her. She had chosen me again and again, with a fierceness that shocked them. And when the silence came, it wasn't acceptance, not truly, but a surrender of sorts. They realized they could not bend her will without destroying her, and perhaps, in some quiet corner of their hearts, they feared losing her altogether. It was during a family gathering, one I never expected to be invited to, that the silence finally gave way to words. Her grandmother, fragile but still commanding the room with her presence, looked at me across the long table. Her voice, soft but clear, carried through the air. "If you make her happy, then perhaps that is enough." That was all she said, but it was more than I had ever expected. It wasn't a blessing, not quite, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was something in between, a fragile truce. And in that moment, I saw the relief in my lover's eyes, the tears she fought to hold back, the way her shoulders seemed to drop their endless burden. Life after that wasn't suddenly perfect. The world didn't magically accept us. The tabloids didn't stop twisting our story, nor did whispers fade overnight. But something shifted within us. We stopped fighting only to prove ourselves to others and started living more for ourselves. We built routines that belonged to no one else, lazy mornings filled with laughter and coffee, afternoons exploring hidden corners of the city, nights wrapped in each other's arms as though the world beyond our walls didn't exist. She began working on projects that mattered to her, using her wealth not as a shield but as a tool to make changes in the world she believed in. And she included me in every step, not as her shadow but as her partner. For the first time, I wasn't standing on the outside looking in. I was part of something real, something we were building together, but it wasn't just about her world or mine, it was about creating a new one that was ours alone. She brought pieces of her life into mine in gentle ways, a bookshelf filled with her favorite novels appearing in my apartment, her grandmother's old piano placed in the corner of our shared space because she wanted me to learn with her, framed photographs of us sitting proudly on her desk despite what anyone thought. And I gave her my world in return, nights walking through streets that smelled of food and rain, laughter with neighbors who had once doubted but now adored her, small moments of joy that cost nothing but meant everything. Slowly, the boundaries blurred, and it didn't feel like her world and my world anymore. It felt like ours. There were still moments of fear, moments when I wondered if this happiness was too fragile, too precious to last. But each time those doubts crept in, she met them with unwavering devotion. "I chose you," she would whisper, her hand against my chest, her eyes holding mine with a steady fire. "I'll always choose you." And over time, I began to believe her, not just in my mind, but in my heart, in my bones, in every part of me that had once been so afraid of love. Her grandmother softened too, in her own quiet way. She began inviting me more often, not out of obligation but out of genuine interest. She would ask about my life, my dreams, my fears, and I could see the walls she had once held so tightly around her granddaughter slowly cracking. One evening, as I helped her up the stairs, she leaned close and whispered, "Thank you, for saving her in more ways than one." The words nearly undid me, because I realized then that she didn't just mean the day I had pulled her from danger. She meant the way I had saved her granddaughter from loneliness, from emptiness, from a life lived only for appearances. And in that moment, I felt something I never thought I would feel in her world. Belonging. The obsession she once had for me had transformed into something deeper, something steadier. It was no longer just about desire or defiance, it was about love, real and enduring. And I, who had once questioned my worth, who had doubted whether I deserved to be loved at all, found myself thriving in her unwavering devotion. She hadn't just chosen me. She had taught me to choose myself, to believe that I was worthy of this happiness. On the anniversary of the day we first met, we stood together on that same street where it had all begun, where I had saved her grandmother without realizing how it would change my life forever. The city lights glowed around us, and the air carried the hum of life, just as it had that day. She looked at me, her eyes shining, and took my hand. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been if you hadn't stopped that day?" she asked softly. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "All the time," I admitted. "And I thank the universe every single day that I did." She leaned in then, her forehead against mine, her voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't just save her. You saved me. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were worth saving too." I kissed her, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that carries years of pain and healing, fear and hope, love and devotion. Around us, the world kept moving, cars honking, people rushing past, but none of it mattered. In that moment, there was only us, the girl who had once been untouchable, and the one who had never believed she was enough, bound together by a love that had survived every storm. And as I held her, I realized something I had never truly believed before: this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning.